know in advance. I will tell this a bit later when everybody gets back also. We will tweet it as well. The first thing is that regarding the Funky Heads party yesterday, we just created an album on Facebook page of the Drupal Association. You can upload your photos. Everybody can join the group. And you can upload the photos about the heads. We are not really interested in anything else. But as always, you can do anything. Someone will review, and you can upload the photos. Who gets the most likes until the lunch will get the prize. Okay? The lunch will be the prize? No, there will be a prize next to the lunch. The other thing, also related to the lunch, before the lunch, after my colleagues Mihai's presentation, please don't leave the room. We are going to leave the room basically together and take a group photo somewhere here in the city center. We will let you know exactly the details. Just please tell everyone to be there. So after the presentation of my colleague Mihai, before lunch, we are going to take the group photo. And that's it. So please welcome the Mobile Planet presentation from Amplexor. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning everybody. I think it was a nice party last night. A lot of beers, a lot of tired faces also. If you're getting tired, just feast yourself on the Red Bull on the second floor. Just come back there. So, talk of this morning is all about mobile. It's actually really nothing to do with Drupal. So it will be in mobile, about mobile in general. So actually, why did I call it for a mobile planet? I think more and more these days, seeing the progress of the web, people using the web on all kinds of different devices. So not only the desktop or the laptops anymore, but more like mobile devices too. So it will be more and more relevant in the future. And right now it's very relevant too. So my name is Jan Lemmens. I work at Amplexor. Actually, I'm a Drupal consultant, but this talk is nothing to do with Drupal. So let's start with take a look at these devices and what makes them special, what makes them different, what are the main concepts that are typical for these devices. Actually, the screen is very different. It's much smaller, and in some cases it has very high resolution compared to a laptop or a desktop, much higher even than some laptops. So the screen is very different. Also, the software stack and the user interface are very different for these kinds of devices. It uses new software operating systems like Android, for example, didn't exist 5 years ago. And the UI is also very different. It's a touch UI, which is very different from the way we used to work with a keyboard and mouse. Also, the connectivity is very different from the classic devices we use. The connectivity fluctuates a lot. So sometimes you have a fast connection when you're a Wi-Fi network, for example. When you're on the road or on the train, go over to a 3G connection or even an edge connection, and it's always fluctuating. So it's really different, the connectivity for these devices. You have various sensors in there, like for example, ambient light sensor, accelerometer, all these things we do not have in a regular system. And then there's one extra thing. Actually, these devices are much smaller and very portable. So they're much more mobile. And you use them all the time, everywhere you are. Not only, you can use them at your desk, which you all do probably, but also in the couch, in the bed, on the toilet, everywhere you want, walking in the park. So it's really, you can use it for, there's really no separate use case for a mobile device, I think. You can use it like a desktop computer too at your desk, but you can use it for all kinds of purposes. But we have to look much further than just these devices, because all other things are coming around these days. You have Google Glass, for example, or right now the hype around the watches is going on. It's even much more smaller screens, or maybe some TVs which have very big screens. And the web also has to work on these devices. So actually, what it's all about is it's all about optimizing the user experience across all these devices. That's really everything. That's where it boils down to. That's the most important thing. Just optimizing the user experience across these devices. So let's take a look at what a classic website looks like today on a mobile device. So this is an example from the New York Times. And you actually can see that all information is very small on the screen. You can read things very good. You see pictures. You can zoom in by double tapping. You really have to do some work to get clicking the links without zooming in, navigating through the menu. A lot of JavaScript in there. It's a bit slow too. This is actually a very typical example of, you see in the top of the website, you can switch to the mobile version of the New York Times. Actually, they're having two separate websites. We'll see in a minute why that's not exactly the way to go these days anymore. So, what you can see here is different types of devices, and it classifies this graph classifies them according to their screen size at the bottom, and on the left you have the capability. What are these devices capable of? So you can see you have feature phones which have very small screens, which have not that much of a capability. Desktop computers are on the other hand. In the beginning, you actually only had feature phones and smartphones. Feature phones went away very fast, but right now you can see you can't really segment these devices anymore. There's really no clear segments anymore. Tablets starting to merge into phones, and phones starting to get some bit bigger, like becoming small tablets. It's really, you can't say this is a smartphone, this is a tablet. You can't make that clear separation anymore, and it starts evolving. So it's really difficult to put these devices into segments, like you see in this slide. For example, you have a lot of different devices going on these days, with a lot of different screen sizes, a lot of different user interfaces actually. So what the New York Times is doing is actually focusing on a particular device type, like a smartphone. They're offering a mobile version, which actually is optimized for a smartphone. So it's actually optimized for like Android or iPhone type of devices. You can't cope with it anymore because the segments are really fluctuating and going through each other. So if they want an optimized view for a tablet, they have to build a third website. Maybe for these they will build a fourth website. You can't maintain these things anymore. So that's why we not focus on these devices or these segments, but just focus on what the web is. And the web is actually meant to be very open, very cross-platform from the beginning. Actually, we're kind of spoiled in the past when there was only one screen size, for example, 15 and 17-inch monitor with one golden resolution, for example. No big deals there. But now we're really seeing the disadvantages of working with fixed grid systems, for example. So just focus on what the core values of the web are, which are interoperability, cross-device, cross-platform, and compatibility. So just what are the key aspects and which greatly influence the user experience? How can we optimize the user experience? The most important ones are actually working on the accessibility of the solution, working on performance, and on your content itself. Those are actually the three most important topics when dealing with user experience. Now let's take a look how we can optimize according to these three components. So if you look at the classic web technology, the real basic stuff we're doing is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are all standards, and we use them every day. And a lot of new technologies are coming along, which actually are extensions on the basic components or enhancements. We have media queries, for example, which is just CSS, CSS3. So it's a new version of the CSS standard. You can have things like Modernizer, which does all kinds of crazy stuff in JavaScript. You can do polyfills to make older browsers run CSS3, for example. There's things like flexbox, where you can rearrange the pieces of HTML code according to the screen size, not only the CSS. There are all kinds of things going on right now, but they're actually all in kind of an experimental phase. They're really not standardized ways of doing these things. Like, for example, you can ask for devices the value of the ambient light sensor or the value of the accelerometer. Those things are really in an experimental experimental phase. A lot of browsers are implementing them, but they're doing it in their own way. They're not using it according to the standard. So the next step is standardizing these things, and then adoption. Most browser vendors like Firefox or Chrome have adopted them a long time ago. Internet Explorer, for example, maybe they're a bit behind, but it's better the last year or so. Actually, it's kind of experimental right now. These technologies are not really widely used, not really integrated into our daily routine that much because of the standards. When you take a look at a website using these technologies, it will not look exactly the same on all devices, which is not actually, it's not the purpose, but still some browsers really lag behind in these capabilities. That's why we have these intermediate solutions like Modernizer to fix these things. Small example, a media query where you can query the orientation of the device, so you can know which device is imported, or landscape mode. You can change some CSS, for example. Or take a look at what is the user interface the user is utilizing. Is it touchscreen? Is it the right one? Course is not that precise, so it's probably touch can be precise, which means the user has a mouse. So maybe you can make your links bigger, for example. Those things are not really standardized right now. We call it experimental phase. It will be standardized in the future. There are in the CSS4 standard, I think. So actually, what Modernizer does, just for your interest, it really uses some JavaScript to insert some classes on the HTML element, which you can use to identify, for example, just a body class called hasTouch. And you know the user has a touch device, and you can use that class to make your buttons bigger, or to disable Hoover menu, for example. Other things, vendor prefixes. Actually, what a lot of browser vendors are doing, before things are getting standardized, they're using their own prefix to do some things. So you have WebKit border radius, mouse border radius for Firefox, and then you just have the standard way of doing things called border radius. The first two lines can be dropped if all people have changed over to the new version of the browser, or when things really get standardized. This actually is a website which allows you to really create these things very easily. Or you can use actually some compilers, like for example the SAS or the LESS language, which compiles. You just only have to define the border radius once, and it generates these things for you. So it's a good intermediate solution. And there's another thing called CSS3 which actually allows you allows Internet Explorer 9 and below to render these things correctly, all done using JavaScript. But you know, using JavaScript is slow, especially on the devices which is not that capable. So it's really important not to use that much JavaScript in mobile websites, or in any website actually. Accessibility, okay. You see, how can we work at the accessibility level? For a typical web solution, you see this as an example where the user visits the site, and actually a pop-up, something pops up which allows the user, asks the user, or maybe it forces the user to download the app which belongs to this website. Actually, what the user probably was doing was just looking for a recipe in Google, and he found a nice recipe. He clicked it, and then you see, soup, but he gets a message for the app, and the user says, okay, app size, clicks OK, downloads, goes to the App Store, pays for the app, downloads the app, opens the app, and the recipe definitely will be gone. There will definitely be no way that it can be linked to the correct page in the app for the one-pot soup. So that's a problem. It's a problem of accessibility. It's actually a problem in which the customer tries to push his app too much, pulls the customer in, and puts his business needs above the user's needs. The user's needs here being actually just trying to get the soup recipe. It's actually, these things are called door slams. So you get the door in the face when you arrive at the website. Like I said, it was more business needs than user needs. Actually, there are some, if you really want to push your app, it's best not to do it. An app really is not a replacement for a website. What you really can do, what you can do if the customer really wants something like this, there are some things provided by the vendors of these devices which you can use, which are actually less harmful to the user or or less offending. You see, this is an example of a smart banner app. And you can actually very easily point to your app in the App Store by using the meta tag, and automatically the banner pops up at the top. If you already have the app, this button, it's view, it changes to, and if you have the app, it's view. If you do not have the app, it says buy, for example. So it's very user-friendly. Hit away, it never pops up again and stored in the cookie. So it's all dealt by the Safari browser in this case. There are also some technologies available for Android or for Windows Phone or Windows RT, all using the same concept actually. That's the way to go if you really need to. So, another important thing is always assume you're working with a touch device. So, you see that the devices are really merging into each other. When you have a Windows RT laptop, or how it's called a Surface RT for example, you can click keyboard on it, you have a fully fledged laptop. If you put the screen off, you have a tablet. And actually the resolution stays the same. It is touch at the same time that this keyboard mouse. So you don't know, when you click the keyboard in, the media queries do not recognize the keyboard, so you can't detect the keyboard in the website for now. So what you should assume is that the user is using a touch device. You should make the targets big on all devices, so even when the widescreen tablets, the media query won't execute and you see the desktop version of the site, it is really usable because the targets are big enough, for example. So 8mm is more like a standard. I think Android uses 7, iOS uses 9 as a golden standard. The touch targets are important, and just assume users are using touch. Also, just for your regular websites, you will have no problems in accessibility. Other thing is hover, which actually is the hovering over the links. In the mobile device, you do not have the hover action. iOS, for example, solves it by clicking once. You get what the hover effect you should get on the desktop. It maybe a menu drops open. That's okay, and then you go further and click the right link. But on Android, for example, it works differently. I'm not sure that you can do it in Android. It changes, but you're not sure about what's going to happen. So it's better to leave out these things. Or you can change the behavior of the JavaScript depending on the device width. Then you're messing with, for example, widescreen tablets, which you do not know for sure if it's a tablet or a desktop or a laptop. So another myth there is, which says there is no page fault. There's actually no page fault because the page fault actually depends on the different devices you're using. So tablets have a very different page fault. They can have actually 2 page faults if you hold it in portrait mode or landscape mode. The same goes for every mobile device, which you can easily switch over. So you can't assume there is a certain page fault. Clients use it to make their most important information appear at the top of the site. For example, call to action buttons, which are highlighted at the top of the website, they should be above the page fault. Otherwise, users have to scroll to the entry to the web store, for example. You can't do that. Actually, there's no page fault. That does not mean that the primary purpose of the website shouldn't be visible at the top of the website. What you should always do is put the primary purpose of a page at the top of the page, or near the top. So most visitors, actually most of them, will see the target or see the information. That's the most important one. It's just a problem of hierarchy and prioritizing of the content. That's this one. Like this. You won't get any trouble using this, for example. Another thing that we're working with these days is, or the past years, 10 years or so, is using things like Photoshop to build websites, to design websites. Actually, when you're doing stuff in Photoshop, it really has a fixed width. It's like working on a sheet of paper. It's very easy for designers. They have a clear context of what they're working on. It's a fixed width. What actually the problem with that is, nowadays the screen sizes have various sizes, for example. And designers tend to throw these designs over the wall. We receive them, and we should get to work and make things responsive. Go to them, can't you give some advice? So it's much better to just Photoshop, not whole websites, but real components. How does a block look like? How does a menu look like? A link, a table, for example. Those kind of things should be designed somewhere. You can do it in Photoshop. It's not the best tool. You can use other tools, but you should really. It's more important that the designer designs these components separately, and that you decide upon how they are rendered for different devices upon the composition of the page, the order of the elements in the browser. So you can really use things like Firebird and go fiddling around in the browser to make things look okay. You can do some rapid prototyping towards the designers and the customers to ask some feedback. So really heavy Photoshop designs of a whole page, it's not really efficient anymore. So it's much better to work with components. So, other thing is that you should pick a smart default. So, there is some discussion going around in the web community about what types of devices should be supported if you build a website. Should it be accessible to everybody in the world using feature phones from 6 years ago? Ideally, it would be. It's not really good. It's not efficient anymore. It's very expensive to do that. But it's much better to look at your statistics for a website. So it really depends on the thing you're building. So for some customers, they really have a lot of visitors coming in using older browsers. Maybe if the population of visitors is a bit older, they're just using their desktop computer, or maybe just tablets, we don't know. But we have to look at the statistics. And if there are a lot of people coming in using smartphones on a very young website for young people, you should take a look at what is the device, the least capable device they're using, and really use that as a smart default. That's where you want to start. That's what the minimum level of support we want to offer. You can do everything, it's impossible. And then you can work mobile first, which means that you start from the smallest or least capable device and you work your way up. So you start developing, you start designing, wireframing, thinking about your website as if it was rendered on the least capable device. And in most cases it's just an entry-level Android phone, for example. You can use that device as a starting point. And then you go, and when you're finished with the smartphone, you go think about the tablet and change things up for the tablet. Then next to the desktop. If you use that way of working, devices which do not support, for example, media queries fall back to the least capable version of the website, which is actually very accessible. If you do the other way around, media queries don't execute, they get the desktop version on a very small screen. So it's really not that robust. This way, if you do it this way, it's more robust. It also forces you to have a lightweight website with less JavaScript, which performs much better because these devices are slower and have a slower connection. So it will definitely work very fast on a bigger screen. So if you do browser detection, it goes wrong sometimes. So it's not a good way to go. It's what the New York Times is doing, in detecting the device, and based on the device string of the user agent, they're going to switch you to another site, or they're going to show a page to switch to another site or something. Those browsers actually, sometimes they lie, just say there are other devices for all kinds of reasons, but you should never trust on device detection to do the things, also because the segments, there are really no clear segments anymore in these device groups. So, also very important to use web standards, just good web standards. For example, this is a website we built for a Belgian company, and you can see just a clear page, but in the top you can see a reader button, and this is Safari browser, this is the reader button in the top. What it does, it actually pops up automatically if you have a well-structured HTML document. So this document is structured using HTML5 standard. The left sidebar is actually just using the aside element. On the right you have the article. We use clear headings. The right order, so the menu is actually beneath the content in the HTML and so on. So Safari detects this. It actually uses some things like readability or algorithms to do this. And detects that this page is actually well structured and it contains an article. And what it does is when you click the button, the page pops up and it really extracts the content from the website. And gives you the opportunity to read it in a clear view without, for example, advertisements around it. You can resize the text with the plus and minus button there. You can easily print it or send it by email. So that's a real advantage you have when you're working with good HTML structure, good use of standards. You get these things for free. Other example is, for example, the drop-down menu, the select box in HTML. Some clients want it really fancy, want to have color when it drops down, want to also, the drop-down has to be red, for example. It's better to just use standard select boxes. You get this behavior on these devices, which really is much better. Like on the iPhone, you have a roller. When you use a select box, or the iPad just makes a list out of it. If you do your own select box, you won't get these advantages and things get weird on these devices. So you can make it a red select box, but you have to use JavaScript and use things like Chosen or something, when there are a lot of libraries going on to do it. And the interface can differ between all these devices, but that's not a problem, because it will be the most optimal interface for that device, and users are actually they're used to that interface. They're used to seeing this roller, and it works really fast. It's really native in the operating system. Another thing is video, for example. You see when you're using HTML5 video in an iPad, for example, you get that icon on the right-hand side, right there, and you get it for free if you use HTML5 video, and you can use that icon to use AirPlay to play it on your TV. So, things you get for free. It does not work on all browsers. Some people benefit from it, some don't. But that's dependent on how the browsers implement their stuff, what the devices are capable of, and why not. There's nothing wrong with a device that has more capability, just have more fancier things available. No problem there. So when doing projects in the web, you ideally use an agile approach. It's very important when doing these kind of projects where websites should be available across a different spectrum of devices. You need a lot of customer feedback. Customers do not know what they want. They never do, but especially for these kind of things, there's much more discussion, much more interpretation, much more creativity involved in building these things. It's much more complex. You need a bigger budget. So you need customer interaction. You need their opinion about things fast and change things fast. So you need really, using waterfall is not done here. When you use a waterfall approach you will be screwed. You can actually do a project that way. It really has to use iterative, incremental approach, like an agile approach or Scrum, for example. So no waterfall. Because there's a lot of communication in an agile approach, the more communication you do, interaction with the customer, actually your time to deliver on the website will actually be very short, much shorter. Because you have that feedback in the front or at the beginning, even when you're developing. So even after 2 weeks of developing, you can go and show your customer something, discuss it with them. Access performance. So we see this thing sometimes popping up, waiting images and stuff on mobile devices. It has various causes. Maybe the JavaScript is slow, maybe the connection is not that fast. These days websites really tend to explode, and one thing, like I said, was the connection speed. So on a typical computer, desktop computer, actually it's a rather flat line. So when you look at it, you're sitting at your desk, you have your cable plugged in, or your Wi-Fi connection, it's stable. It's relatively stable, it's very fast, and you have a straight line there, because your PC actually doesn't move. You can walk around with it, but in general it doesn't move. Connection stays stable, no problem. But no problem to render, for example, this website. Has anybody seen this website? It's a website from Oakley to promote the new glasses. It uses some the parallel effect, the parallax effects when you scroll and all the things coming in and all the dirt squishing into the. It's very nice. It's a long page. Actually, it's very big. So when using 3G connection, for example, you can't load these pages quick. It takes you more than 10 minutes maybe. It's really not accessible for these users, and maybe they miss out on the information on this website. So any guess about how many floppy disks you can fill with this website? It's 50. So it's more than 60, 70 megabytes in total size this website. It's crazy. So when you're on a mobile device, this is the connection speed. Actually, changes all the time because you move. But if you move, you cross tunnels when you're on the train, you're just walking around in the park, you sit at home, then you have a stable connection. You don't know. PCs can actually be mobile too. If you take your laptop on a train, you have the same effect using 3G connections. So even people with very capable devices can't see your website. So the size of the website is important. So to give you an idea, some 100 kilobytes on the train, for example, is 10 seconds to load. So a good website, maybe it's best that it's under half a megabyte. Why is it that slow? Mostly because of the JavaScript and the images. So images, it's really a big problem nowadays. The Retina images, for example, the Retina screens, a lot of customers demand images looking crisp on these high-resolution displays. Actually, you have to be aware of that the Retina screen is actually the same pixel amount as a regular screen times 4. And so you have the double of the resolution in the width and in the height. So take a picture of 200 by 600 pixels, for example, it really quadruples the size of the image and the number of pixels. And the only good solution right now that actually works across all things is just better to use an opt-in, which means that you ask the customer or the client, the visitor of the website actually, ask him if he would want these kind of images displayed or not. If you do not do that, you get into trouble, because those are solutions. Why you get in trouble? You can use responsive images and all these kind of things that load different sizes of images, different quality levels of image depending on the size of the screen, maybe on the device the visitor is using device protection. Actually, you cannot trust these things. It does not mean that you have a big screen and a fast connection, not at all. When you're on the train, for example. So even when you're mobile with your laptop, bad connection, and you get on these high resolution images, things will get slow. So it really, we can't really solve these things right now because we can't, we don't know what the quality of the connection is of the user. There's no way of detecting that right now. There's no any standard available to do that across all these things. So good solution could be, the opt-in is not really that nice for a visitor. Other solutions are just to not use these big images, just use smaller images, like for example 220 pixels in width, maximum, just for the desktop side, for example, for the desktop view of the website. You do not have these big images, but on the smartphone, they fill the full screen. You should also always compress all images. It really makes a big difference. Just compressing it for the web really reduces the size. You can use responsive images, but they work on the size of the screen, so they not work all the time, like we said. You have two different standards there. There are actually two working. You have the W3C working group, the W3C that is working on these kind of things, and then there's the responsive images working group, which has an other opinion. I think the right one is going to win because Safari implemented the right one just 2 months ago. I think it's not that logic. I think the left one is more logically because it's more like the video element. It has different sources, and the picture element on the right, they're doing things with the source set and using different images for different screen sizes. I think the right one is going to win here, but yeah. For JavaScript, it's important to only include the scripts when you need them. Not on every page load the full jQuery library, for example. jQuery is actually a very big library. But it's nowadays, you can use jQuery to have cross-platform stuff, but nowadays browsers are that good, are that well, support JavaScript. It's really standardized across browsers nowadays. So you shouldn't load a full jQuery library just to select an element of the page. There are much better ways of doing that. You can use a simplified version of jQuery called min.js, for example. It just contains the basic stuff, which is sufficient for most websites. So you shouldn't use these big libraries all the time. You should think about it twice. And also never use JavaScript for animations. Always CSS, because JavaScript is very slow for doing animations. It's not guaranteed that the animation will be fluid. There's some problems with frame rates. that do not match the frame rate of the screen in JavaScript. In CSS, it's done natively, actually straight in the browser, in the CSS engine. So it's much faster. These browsers really have fast libraries for fast engines for doing CSS. So never JavaScript there. So let's talk about responsive design for a minute. Don't know if everybody's informed about what responsive design is. I hope so, because otherwise all the previous slides would look very weird. Responsive design actually uses that your website, the real code, just really solves a problem that for different screen sizes you can have different layout of your website. Not layout, but markup, for example, styling. You can change the CSS based on the width of the screen. It also involves using fluid grids. It's all done in the front end, it's nothing to do with back end. So it really is not dependent on the CMS you're using. So you can use it, but it does not solve all your problems. So it's just a technology. It's not really a full solution. There's really more to it. Responsive design actually uses the same content for all websites. Not only using laptops, but smartphones, tablets, they also the same content. You can hide some things, but that's really not done. It's a bad practice. So, because you see the same content for every device, that's actually the whole point of the system, that you just have to maintain one website, just one website for everybody on the web. That's actually perfectly correct. So, what you can do if you want to change things up, you can use conditional loading. So, if the device gets big enough, you can load some extra things. But should you use it? Yeah, maybe if the client requests so. But it's much more better to just have the same thing for all devices. Because when users get home at their couch and they're taking their smartphone out to browse for some information they saw on their desktop computer in the morning, and they don't find that information on their smartphone, really messing with the user. Because he really wants the same information regardless of the device he's using. It's important to always use representative content. So when you're building websites, never use lorem ipsum texts, for example. They do not contain bold, they do not contain links, not contain lists, no tables, so you should really use the real content that will be present in the final website. You can really ask the customer, just give me some representative content. You can scrape their current website maybe, so no lorem ipsum there. And you shouldn't think about pages, like we talked about the Photoshop stuff. Should more think about components and how do these components change when the screen size is changing. So if you think about it, it's more important than just think about the whole page, because those components are really important and you should treat them separately. Also be very careful with third-party content. You don't know what that content is going to do. For example, if you want things embedded in an iframe, iframes do not work that well in responsive design. That the website loaded in the wireframe, in the iframe, actually does not adapt itself. Embed stuff can mess things up too. If you embed a video, for example, use the embed, video can get very big, and responsive design breaks. So make sure you have control. You do it yourself using HTML5, for example. If you're doing video, just use YouTube, it works very well, and just set the maximum width of the video, and it scales along. Same for Google Maps. But be careful, it's an edge case. Using iframes does not work anymore, so APIs will get much more important in the future. APIs to get information out of systems and to give your information to other systems, for example, apps. So you have an iPhone app you built, it needs information from your content management system. Drupal 8 actually is very good for that. It has very good web services. And you can really pull content in, but also make your content available. Last thing is content strategy. So the third thing, optimizing the user experience, just think about the content. Why do people visit websites? It's because of the content. And it's actually the first exercise you should make when doing new projects is think about what is the structure of my content, which content do I have, where do I want to display it? What is the priority of the different pieces of content? Which content can we throw away? Should there be new content somewhere? Should we change things? What are the semantics of this content? Does it have some meaning, or is it just plain text page, or can we make some structure in there? So it's called content strategy thinking about these things. So it's about structure, priority, and reuse. If you structure your content in the right way, you can reuse it across platforms. If you open up your content using APIs, apps can use that content, for example, and just hide, for example, full text of a page, just show the introduction. You can do all kinds of things if you break these things up in different components. So mostly when we come at a client, things look like this, and then we can try to put a bit of sense into it. It's a difficult process, trying to really go and think straight about doing wireframes, doing layouts, doing branding, doing design, and then just create a nice design, nice layout, and then just take a look at the content and just squish it in the design. It should be the other way around. Start with content, work a design around it that works to represent the content. So, better a gone should look like this, but it actually never is. It's a utopia. So, it's important to remember that it's really back to basics now. And doing these kind of things, we don't know what devices will come up in the future. We don't know the capabilities of these devices. It will always be a mix of devices and different capabilities. There will never be standards. The standards will never be finished. So HTML5 isn't actually just HTML. I think I dropped 5 in the specs or in the doc type. Just means that it evolves, never will be finished. So things will get added, things will maybe get removed. So it's really organic, those standards. So it's important to keep it simple so it works on all these devices. Things to keep in mind are performance, compatibility, your content, having great focus on the correct content, and accessibility, of course. A great example of this is the website from gov.uk. Who built it, but it's actually quite good. So it's actually a very, very basic website. You should take a look at it on your smartphone or tablet or whatever. It works perfectly. It's very fast, not too fancy stuff. It looks actually very nice. Good overview of the content. It's very well structured using HTML5, and it's not using any fancy stuff, but it's a delight to use. It just works everywhere. It's really great. So, short word about testing. When you test these things, it's difficult. I don't think everybody has device labs. In England, there are some people having big device labs, having all the devices in the world. Actually, they do. They have to update it daily. The new device is expensive to share it among different companies. It's really crazy. You can't do that. You can do it, but it's really expensive. It depends on what you're working with. But you should test early. Test from the start. When you're building something, really test using real devices, not simulators. Simulators work for testing some things. You can resize the browser window, test the responsive design, but to test performance, to test real how well the thing behaves, like how fluid it is, how the animations go along if you use them, what happens when you turn the screen, does it scale the right way, those kind of things. Simulators don't get these things quite right. So it's best to use real devices, definitely, not always simulators. You should test continuously throughout the process, not only at the end or at the beginning. Because at every phase, everything you build across these devices. So what you actually can do is inform your customer what devices you are testing on. You do not have all the devices, but you should inform them about what devices you're using, so they know what you support. So, okay. That's it for the slides. Are there any questions? Okay.
You said that JavaScript is, generally speaking, bad for the site, right? For any website, and particularly for mobile versions. I want to test, for example, if you use JavaScript just for Ajax, it still remains bad as performance hit, or
There's there's no other way of doing it. If you want to use conditional loading, asynchronous things,
Yes.
you need to use JavaScript. It will bring down the performance a bit, but yeah, you have no other option there. So yeah.
It brings down the performance of the way the site is fluid or the way
Yeah,
of loading.
So the JavaScript you're using has to load, has to execute. Some browsers do not have that great capabilities for JavaScript running, and things get slow. So you can do some checks. What you actually should do in your JavaScript is build some checks to check what the capabilities of the device are. And there's some really simple things to do, like, for example, does this device supports asynchronous requests? Sometimes it doesn't. Then you should not execute the code or even load the code, for example. So there are some simple tests I have not included, which you can look at them on the web. Very simple tests to test if the device is it's a modern device, let's say, and then you should load these things. Otherwise, you shouldn't. But it actually has a bit of performance issues, yeah. But sometimes there's no option.
Okay, because I was wondering, for example, if you use JavaScript for bits of HTML, bringing them in the site without loading the whole page, it would be better. But it's still worse because of the
yeah, it's a trade-off. You can just load basic stuff on the page and then load things asynchronously. Just the basic stuff is there, and then things are loaded. Sidebar is loaded, for example. Advertisements are loaded asynchronously. That's important because first the content is displayed, then the text. So it's a trade-off. It depends. Is the trade-off? Is the size of the website sufficiently less big? And is the JavaScript not bigger or slower than loading the whole page at once? You have to check that.
that was
Depends on the case.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Okay, in the back.
Hi. You mentioned earlier about images that could be bigger on your mobile devices. How about data URIs? I mean, embedded images.
About data?
URI. Embedded images inside HTML.
Yeah. Actually, so you're talking about another standard to load these images, to do responsive images, or?
No, just the images embedded in the, that base 64.
Because they're smaller that way, so you're talking about vector stuff, or am I wrong?
No,
You could use SVG, for example, so you only send the data and you render the image in the front end. If you can have, it's the best way to do because the image will always be crisp on every device because you render it on the device. It's actually used a lot for logos and simple stuff. Logos, taglines, these things are very visual, not text, are a mix of text and images. You can use vector graphics indeed. It's the best way to go if you can, but it does not have that much of a, there are not that much use cases where you can use it. Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thanks very much. Enjoy the